Hashtag, they never expected Earth to fight back. Now, they regret everything. The Zephyrian High Command had studied thousands of worlds before Earth. Each conquest followed the same predictable pattern. Initial bombardment, ground invasion, swift surrender. Species across the galaxy had learned that resistance against the Zephyrian Empire was futile. Their technology was superior, their numbers overwhelming, and their reputation preceded them like a shadow of death. Admiral Keth Var stood before the holographic display showing the third planet from a yellow star, its blue and green surface rotating slowly in the projection. The intelligence reports were spread across his desk in neat stacks, each one confirming what the Empire already knew about primitive civilizations. Another backwater world, muttered Commander Rixtal, his scaled fingers drumming against the metal table. The inhabitants haven't even achieved faster-than-light travel. This should take no more than a few solar cycles. The data was clear. The planet's inhabitants, who called themselves humans, had only recently begun exploring their own star system. Their weapons were chemical-based projectiles and primitive nuclear devices. Their largest vessels couldn't even leave their planet's atmosphere for extended periods. By Zephyrian standards, they were barely out of the Stone Age. Kethvar had conquered 47 worlds in his career. Each had fallen within days of the first orbital strike. The pattern was always the same. Demonstrate overwhelming force, target population centers, wait for surrender. The humans would be no different. Begin standard protocol, Kethvar ordered. Deploy the advanced fleet. 3 dreadnoughts should be sufficient for initial orbital bombardment. The Zephyrian advanced fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of Earth's solar system. Massive vessels, each over 2 kilometers long, their hulls gleaming with energy shields and weapon arrays. The lead ship, Dominator, moved steadily toward the blue planet, its sensors mapping defensive installations and population centers. On Earth, the first detection came from a deep space monitoring station. Dr. Sarah Chun was reviewing routine data when the readings made her blood run cold. 3 massive objects were approaching from beyond Pluto, their energy signatures unlike anything in human databases. This can't be right, she whispered, running the calculations again. The objects were huge, moving at impossible speeds, and heading directly for Earth. Within hours, every government on Earth had received the alert. Emergency sessions convened in capitals around the world. Military leaders gathered in secure bunkers. Scientists worked frantically to understand what they were facing. President Morrison stood in the Situation Room, surrounded by his top advisors. The main screen showed tracking data from every observatory on Earth. The 3 objects would reach Earth's orbit in less than 72 hours. What are our options? Morrison asked. General Rodriguez pulled up tactical displays. Sir, we have nuclear arsenals, but nothing designed for space combat. Our orbital platforms are civilian satellites and the International Space Station. We have no defensive capability against ships this size. What about communication attempts? Dr. Elizabeth Warren, head of SETI, shook her head. We've been broadcasting on every frequency we can think of. No response. If these are intelligent beings, they're choosing not to talk. The Secretary of Defense leaned forward. Mr. President, we need to consider that these might not be coming in peace. Meanwhile, aboard the Dominator, Captain Vexron was reviewing the planet's defensive capabilities. His sensors had cataloged every military installation, every nuclear facility, every population center above 50,000 inhabitants. The humans had detected their approach, but their response was laughably inadequate. Small chemical rockets were launching from various points on the planet's surface, carrying what appeared to be crude satellites. Some orbital installations were powering up, but they were clearly civilian in nature. The humans were trying to see them better, not fight them. They're not even attempting to flee, Vexron reported to Admiral Kethvar. No evacuations chips, no escape vectors. They're simply watching us approach. Kethvar found this curious, but not unprecedented. Some species froze when faced with overwhelming force. Perhaps they understand the futility of resistance. Begin standard bombardment sequence. Target their largest population centers first. The Dominator powered up its main plasma cannons. Energy readings spiked as the massive weapons prepared to fire. In military bunkers around Earth, alarms screamed as sensors detected the charging weapons. Sir, They're powering weapons, General Rodriguez reported. Energy signatures are off the charts. President Morrison closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of humanity's survival on his shoulders. When he opened them, his voice was steady. Send a message on all frequencies. Tell them we surrender. Dr. Warren's hands flew over a console. Broadcasting on all channels, sir. Multiple languages, mathematical sequences, everything we can think of. The message repeated across space. This is Earth. We surrender. Please respond. Aboard the Zephyrian ship, the communications officer looked puzzled. Sir, they're broadcasting what appears to be a surrender message. Captain Vexron paused. In his experience, surrender came after demonstration of force, not before. Are you certain? Yes, sir. Multiple transmissions, various languages. They appear to be offering unconditional surrender. This was unexpected. Vexron had never encountered a species that surrendered before the first shot was fired. He contacted Admiral Kethvar for guidance. Most unusual, the Admiral mused, but ultimately irrelevant. A surrender now saves us ammunition. Proceed with occupation protocols. Deploy ground forces to major population centers. Captain Vexron gave the order, and hundreds of drop ships launched from the 3 dreadnoughts. Each carried a full battalion of Zephyrian shock troopers, their powered armor gleaming as they descended through Earth's atmosphere. The first landings occurred simultaneously across the globe. Beijing, New York, London, Moscow, Tokyo, Delhi, every major city received its contingent of occupying forces. The humans watched from behind hastily erected barriers as the alien soldiers took control of government buildings, communication centers, and military installations. From his command post in the Pentagon bunker, General Rodriguez watched the feeds from around the world. The aliens were efficient, professional, and overwhelmingly powerful. Their individual soldiers stood 7 feet tall in powered armor, armed with energy weapons that could punch through tank armor. Sir, we're getting reports from all sectors, Colonel Martinez reported. The aliens have secured major installations worldwide. No resistance has been offered. President Morrison nodded grimly. And casualties? Minimal, sir. They seem focused on control points rather than killing. A few security personnel were stunned when they didn't move fast enough, but no fatalities so far. This was small comfort. Humanity had effectively been conquered in a single day without firing a shot. But Morrison knew they had done the right thing. Any resistance would have been suicide. Captain Vexron established his command center in what the humans call the United Nations building. The large assembly hall made an excellent staging area for his operations. He studied reports from his subordinates around the globe. Resistance? He asked his aide. None, sir. Complete compliance. The local authorities are cooperating fully. Vexron found this remarkable. In 40 campaigns, he had never seen such immediate, complete submission. Usually there were pockets of resistance, guerrilla fighters, at least some defiance. The humans had simply given up. Perhaps they're more intelligent than their technology suggests, he mused. The first week of occupation proceeded smoothly. Zephyrian administrators worked with human governments to establish new hierarchies. Essential services continued operating. The aliens showed no interest in harming civilian populations. They simply wanted control. But beneath the surface of compliance, something else was happening. Dr. Chun found herself assigned as a scientific liaison to the Zephyrian Research Division. They were interested in human technology, apparently finding some aspects surprisingly ingenious despite their primitive nature. Your computer networks are remarkably efficient, noted Science Officer Crixon AL as they toured a data center. We had not expected such sophisticated information management from a pre-space civilization. Thank you, Dr. Chin replied carefully. We've always been good at working with what we have. She was studying them as much as they were studying humanity. The Zephyrians were confident to the point of arrogance. Their technology was indeed far superior, but they had obvious weaknesses. They relied heavily on their equipment, rarely removing their environmental suits, and seemed uncomfortable with Earth's gravity and atmosphere. More importantly, they were underestimating humanity. In a hidden facility beneath the Colorado mountains, a different kind of meeting was taking place. World leaders who had supposedly surrendered were gathering via secure, quantum-encrypted channels that the aliens hadn't detected. Report status, President Morrison said quietly. Prime Minister Nakamura spoke first. Our people are cataloging every piece of alien technology they can observe. We're learning their patrol patterns, their communication frequencies, their weapon capabilities. President Chun Wei nodded. Chinese intelligence has identified several key vulnerabilities. Their ships require specific atmospheric conditions for optimal operation. Their ground forces have limited operational time without their support vessels. Chancellor Mueller added, German scientists believe we can adapt our manufacturing capabilities to produce countermeasures. We need time and coordination. General Rodriguez brought up tactical displays. Every military on Earth is reorganizing under cover of cooperation. We're using their own efficiency against them. They've allowed us to maintain command structures as long as we appear compliant. Morrison looked around the virtual conference table at the faces of world leaders who had spent decades as rivals and competitors. Gentlemen, ladies, we have one chance at this. They think we're defeated. They think we're primitive. They think we're helpless. A grim smile crossed his face. They have no idea what humanity is capable of when we're fighting for survival. The Zephyrians had made their first critical error. They assumed surrender meant defeat. They had conquered the human governments, but they had not conquered the human spirit. In workshops around the world, disguised as routine maintenance and cooperation, the greatest minds of humanity were working on a problem that had never been solved in galactic history: how to fight back against an overwhelming technological advantage. The aliens celebrated their swift victory, not knowing that the real war hadn't even begun. As Admiral Kethvar reviewed the occupation reports from his flagship, he was pleased with the efficiency of the operation. Another world added to the empire with minimal cost and maximum speed. He was already planning his next campaign. He had no way of knowing that in the minds of 7 billion humans, a single thought was taking shape. Asterisk, we are not defeated. We are preparing. Asterisk, the Zephyrian Empire had conquered humanity's governments in a day. They would soon learn that conquering humanity itself would require far more than superior technology. In hidden bunkers and secret facilities around the globe, the counterattack was already beginning. The Underground War begins 3 months had passed since the Zephyrian occupation began. To outside observers, Earth appeared to be adapting well to alien rule. Human governments functioned under Zephyrian oversight, commerce continued, and the population seemed resigned to their new reality. Captain Vexron had been promoted to planetary governor for his efficient conquest. He ruled from his command center in Geneva, coordinating with regional administrators across the globe. His daily reports to Admiral Kethvar were models of bureaucratic success. Resistance activity, minimal, he dictated to his aide. Economic output, maintaining pre-conquest levels. Population compliance, 97%. Recommendation, reduce garrison forces and reassign vessels to new campaigns. What Governor Vexron didn't know was that humanity had been using those 3 months to accomplish the impossible. Deep beneath the Rocky Mountains, in a facility that officially didn't exist, Dr. Sarah Chun stood before a table covered with alien technology. Scattered around her were pieces of Zephyrian equipment that had been accidentally damaged during routine maintenance operations, carefully collected by human workers and smuggled to hidden research facilities around the world. Their power cells are incredibly efficient, she explained to the assembled scientists via encrypted hologram. But they operate on a frequency that our electronics can disrupt if we amplify the right signal. Dr. Yuki Tanaka from the Tokyo facility nodded. We've had similar discoveries. Their environmental suits have a critical flaw. They can't compensate for rapid atmospheric pressure changes. Their bodies aren't adapted to Earth's gravity without artificial support. Professor Elena Volkov spoke from the Moscow bunker. Most interesting is their psychology. They've never encountered species that surrendered and then fought back. Their entire tactical doctrine assumes that surrender equals permanent defeat. What these scientists had discovered was something the Zephyrian Empire had never encountered in their centuries of conquest, a species capable of learning and adapting while pretending to be beaten. Above ground, the appearance of normalcy continued. But beneath the surface, humanity was at war. In Detroit, former auto workers were retooling factories to produce weapons that looked like civilian equipment. What appear to be water purification systems were actually electromagnetic pulse generators designed to disable Zephyrian electronics. In Silicon Valley, software engineers working under the guise of improving human-Zephyrian communication systems were actually developing computer viruses tailored to alien operating systems. In military bases around the world, soldiers conducted equipment maintenance drills that were actually training exercises for weapons that didn't yet exist but soon would. The key to humanity's strategy was something the Zephyrians couldn't understand: the concept of distributed resistance. Instead of a centralized military response that could be easily detected and crushed, humans had created a network of small, independent cells that appeared unconnected but were actually part of a coordinated global effort. Lieutenant Colonel Maria Santos ran one such cell from a location the Zephyrians would never think to search: a primary school in rural Brazil. During the day, it functioned normally. At night, the basement became a weapons development facility. "Show me the prototype," she said to Carlos Mendez, a former aerospace engineer who now officially worked as a janitor. Carlos led her to a device that looked like a large fire extinguisher. "We call it the Screamer," he said. "Broadcasts on the same frequency their suits use for environmental regulation. One burst from this will cause their life support to malfunction for approximately 30 seconds. 30 seconds to do what? Run away mostly. But if you're creative..." Carlos shrugged. 30 seconds without life support in Earth's atmosphere will leave them disoriented and vulnerable. Santos nodded approvingly. "How many can we produce?" "With our current setup, maybe 50 units per week. But if the network in Sao Paulo comes online..." He smiled. Thousands. Similar conversations were happening in hidden facilities around the globe. Humanity was building an arsenal using the aliens' own confidence against them. Meanwhile, in orbit, Admiral Kethvar was reviewing reports from across the Empire. Earth had been such a success that it was being used as a template for future conquests. The human model proves that overwhelming technological superiority can achieve instant compliance, he noted in his report to the Imperial Senate. "I recommend implementing immediate surrender protocols for all future campaigns." He had no idea that his success was about to become the Empire's greatest disaster. The signal came at exactly midnight, Greenwich Mean Time. It was simple, a 2-second burst of static on a radio frequency that the Zephyrians monitored but considered insignificant. To human ears, it sounded like nothing. But to resistance cells around the world, it was the message they had been waiting for. Operation Uprising begins now. Governor Vexron was in his command center when the first report started coming in. "Sir," his communications officer called out, "we're receiving distress signals from Sector 7. "What kind of distress?" "Unknown, sir." The patrols simply stopped responding. Before Vexron could reply, more reports flooded in. Patrols going silent in London. A supply depot losing contact in Cairo. A communications relay failing in Sydney. "Sir," his aide approached nervously, "we're losing contact with ground units worldwide." Vexron's scales darkened, a Zephyrian sign of confusion and growing anger. How is this possible? There's been no organized resistance. The answer was becoming clear as reports continued to arrive. Humanity hadn't organized resistance. They had organized warfare. In London, Sergeant Major James Fletcher led a team of former SAS soldiers disguised as maintenance workers. They had spent months learning the patrol routes of the Zephyrian Guard unit responsible for protecting the House of Parliament. "Remember," Fletcher whispered to his team as they approached the alien checkpoint, "their suits can't handle rapid pressure changes. The devices will give us a 30-second window." His team carried what appeared to be routine maintenance equipment. Hidden inside were the Screamers, pressure bombs designed to create sudden atmospheric disturbances, and weapons that had been carefully crafted to appear completely harmless until activated. The Zephyrian guards barely glanced at them. After 3 months, maintenance workers were part of the background, invisible and irrelevant. Fletcher's team split up, each member taking a predetermined position. At his signal, they activated their Screamers simultaneously. The effect was immediate. The Zephyrian guards stumbled, their environmental suits failing to compensate for the sudden atmospheric disruption. For 30 seconds, they were vulnerable. 30 seconds was more than enough. When their suits came back online, the guards found themselves disarmed, restrained, and surrounded by humans who were no longer pretending to be helpless. "Welcome to the real Earth," Fletcher said quietly. Similar scenes played out across the globe. In Tokyo, former Yakuza worked with Self-Defense Force soldiers to take control of Zephyrian communication hubs. In Moscow, Spetsnaz operators emerged from sewers to capture alien supply depots. In New York, police officers and firefighters who had been working closely with occupying forces suddenly revealed their true allegiance. The coordination was perfect. After 3 months of careful planning, humanity struck simultaneously at every Zephyrian position on Earth. But the real surprise came when the aliens tried to call for orbital support. In space, the crew of the Dominator received the distress calls from the surface. Captain Treskar, who had replaced the promoted Vexron, ordered immediate bombardment of human population centers. "Charge main batteries," he commanded. "If they want to resist, we'll remind them why that's futile." The ship's weapons powered up, energy readings climbing toward firing capacity. But as the main batteries reached full charge, something impossible happened. The ship's power grid fluctuated, then failed completely. "What's happening?" Treskar demanded. "Sir," his engineer reported, panic creeping into his voice, "our main computer system it's infected with some kind of virus. The humans somehow penetrated our networks." What the Zephyrians didn't know was that for 3 months, every time they had connected to human computer systems for routine coordination, human programmers have been quietly installing dormant code into their networks. Code that had been designed by the best minds on Earth to activate simultaneously and cause maximum disruption. Dr. Raj Patel, speaking from his hidden facility in Mumbai, had spent his career in cybersecurity. His voice crackled over the secure network connecting resistance cells worldwide. Their systems are completely compromised. Every ship in orbit is offline. The orbital fleet, humanity's greatest threat, was floating helpless in space. Governor Vexron found himself trapped in his command center as human forces surrounded the building. Former Swiss Guard soldiers, who had been assigned to protect him, had revealed their true loyalty by stunning his alien bodyguards. President Morrison, who had supposedly surrendered unconditionally 3 months ago, walked into Vexron's command center wearing a military uniform instead of the civilian clothes he had worn during the occupation. "Governor," Morrison said politely, "I believe we need to renegotiate the terms of our relationship." Vexron's scales had turned completely black, a sign of extreme distress among his species. "This is impossible. You surrendered. Your species lacks the capability for this level of coordination." Morrison smiled grimly. "That's your first mistake, Governor. You assumed surrender meant defeat. On Earth, sometimes surrender is just another form of strategy." Around the world, similar scenes were playing out. Every major Zephyr installation was under human control. Every alien administrator was in custody. The occupation force that had conquered Earth in a single day had been neutralized in a single hour. But Morrison wasn't finished. "You made a second mistake, Governor. You assumed that because our technology was primitive, we were primitive. You never considered what happens when a supposedly primitive species has 3 months to study your technology while you're not paying attention." Dr. Chin's voice came over the communication system. "Sir, we've confirmed control of all orbital platforms. The alien fleet is completely disabled." Vexron slumped in his chair. "What do you want?" Morrison's expression turned cold. "What we want, Governor, is for you to send a message to Admiral Kethvar. Tell him that Earth is no longer occupied territory. And then we discuss how this is going to work going forward. Because you see, Governor, we've learned some very interesting things about your empire over the past 3 months. What the Zephyrians didn't know was that humanity's resistance wasn't just about freeing Earth. Hidden in military bunkers around the world, human scientists have been studying every piece of alien technology they could get their hands on. They had reverse-engineered Zephyrian computers, analyzed their ship designs, and mapped their communication networks. Humanity hadn't just been preparing to fight back. They had been preparing to take the war to the stars. General Rodriguez entered the command center, carrying a tablet showing tactical displays. "Sir, we've established contact with resistance movements on 17 worlds the Zephyrians conquered in the past decade. Turns out, not everyone accepted defeat as readily as the Empire believed." Morrison nodded. "Governor Vexron, you're about to learn something important about human nature. We don't just fight for ourselves. We fight for anyone who's been oppressed by bullies like your empire. The Zephyrian Empire had come to Earth expecting an easy conquest. Instead, they had awakened something they had never encountered in their centuries of expansion, a species that turned apparent defeat into the foundation for total victory. As reports flooded in from around the globe, confirming successful operations, Morrison allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. The aliens had superior technology, but they had never faced an enemy that could adapt, learn, and fight back using their own advantages against them. The occupation of Earth was over. The liberation of the galaxy was about to begin. The Empire Strikes Back. Admiral Kethvar stared at the message from Earth in complete disbelief. Governor Vexron's transmission had arrived 12 hours ago, and the Admiral had read it 17 times, hoping the words would somehow change. The human resistance has successfully captured all ground installations and disabled our orbital fleet, the message stated in formal military language. Request immediate reinforcement. Situation critical. Impossible. The Admiral had conquered 47 worlds. Never, not once, had a defeated species managed organized resistance, let alone a successful uprising that neutralized an entire occupation force. Communications. Kethvar barked to his aide. Connect me with the Imperial Senate. The hologram of Senator Prime Vex Loth materialized before him, the elderly Zephyrian's ceremonial robes shimmering in the projection. Admiral, I trust you have an explanation for the concerning reports from Earth. Senator Prime, I believe we are dealing with an unprecedented situation. The humans appear to have capabilities our intelligence severely underestimated. Vex Loth's expression didn't change, but his silence spoke volumes. In the Empire's history, intelligence failures resulted in disgrace, demotion, or worse. How many ships do you need to restore order? Kethvar had already run the calculations. A full battle fleet, Senator Prime. Minimum of 20 dreadnoughts with full support vessels. If the humans can disable our technology as reported, we need overwhelming numerical superiority. 20 dreadnoughts to subdue a primitive world that surrendered without resistance 3 months ago. Vex Loth's tone carried the weight of imperial displeasure. Admiral, are you suggesting that our entire military doctrine is flawed? No, Senator Prime. I'm suggesting that the humans are different. Different was an understatement that Kethvar would soon understand. On Earth, the successful resistance had triggered a transformation that amazed even human leaders. Within days of the uprising, every major corporation had voluntarily converted their facilities to support the war effort. Scientists shared research freely across former national boundaries. Military forces that had been rivals for decades integrated seamlessly under unified command. President Morrison found himself leading a planet that had achieved something unprecedented in human history: complete global unity in pursuit of a single goal. Status report, he requested during the daily briefing in the Underground Command Center. Dr. Chun stepped forward, her exhaustion evident after weeks of 18-hour workdays. We've completed reverse engineering their faster-than-light communication system. We can now monitor their military channels across several star systems. General Rodriguez added, our manufacturing consortiums have produced enough electromagnetic pulse weapons to disable their entire current fleet. But intelligence suggests they're sending reinforcements. How many? Morrison asked. Dr. Chun consulted her tablet. 20 dreadnoughts, 40 support vessels, approximately 15,000 ground troops. The room fell silent. Humanity had managed to defeat a small occupation force through surprise and preparation. A full battle fleet was an entirely different challenge. But Morrison had learned something important about human nature over the past months. When faced with impossible odds, humanity didn't despair. They innovated. Recommendations? Dr. Elizabeth Warren, who had transitioned from SETI research to military intelligence, cleared her throat. Sir, we've been analyzing their communication patterns. The Zephyrian Empire has been using the same conquest model for centuries. They've never had to adapt because nothing has ever forced them to. Meaning, they're predictable, sir. They'll try to solve the Earth problem the same way they solve every problem, with overwhelming force applied in standard patterns. Morrison nodded slowly. And if we're not where they expect us to be when they arrive? General Rodriguez smiled grimly. Then we turn their strength into weakness. What followed was the most ambitious military operation in human history. Using captured Zephyrian technology and human engineering ingenuity, Earth began implementing a strategy that would have been impossible 6 months earlier. Phase 1 involved evacuating every major population center on Earth. Using transport ships reverse-engineered from Zephyrian shuttles, humanity spread across the solar system. Mars colonies were expanded rapidly. Moon bases were constructed in record time. Asteroid mining stations became military outposts. But the masterpiece was Phase 2, making Earth itself into a trap. Dr. Yuki Tanaka stood in what used to be downtown Tokyo, now empty except for carefully placed equipment. The seismic charges are positioned along all major fault lines, she reported. When activated, they'll create earthquake activity that will disrupt their landing protocols. Similar preparations were taking place worldwide. Cities were rigged with electromagnetic pulse generators powerful enough to disable entire fleets. Underground facilities were stocked with weapons designed specifically to exploit Zephyrian vulnerabilities. Most importantly, everything was networked through a communication system the aliens couldn't detect or intercept. Governor Vexron, still held in comfortable but secure custody, watched these preparations with growing alarm. You're going to fight a full battle fleet with guerrilla tactics? Morrison, visiting the alien commander to gather intelligence, nodded. Governor, your people keep making the same mistake. You think technology wins wars. But technology is just a tool. Wars are won by the people who want victory more than the people who expect victory. You cannot hide an entire population, Vexron protested. Our sensors will detect your thermal signatures, your power generation, your life signs. Morrison smiled. Governor, you still don't understand. We're not hiding. We're everywhere. The Zephyrian battle fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of Earth's solar system, exactly as human intelligence had predicted. 20 dreadnoughts arranged in the standard Imperial formation, with support vessels distributed according to established doctrine. Admiral Kethvar studied the scanner displays from his flagship, the Imperial Vengeance. Curious, he muttered. I'm detecting minimal energy signatures from the planet's surface. Captain Draval consulted his instruments. Sir, it appears the human population centers are empty. No significant thermal readings, no communication traffic, no industrial activity. Have they fled to other worlds? Unknown, sir. Our long-range scans show increased activity on their moon and the fourth planet, but not enough to account for their entire population. Kethvar considered this development. Perhaps the humans had realized the futility of resistance and evacuated their world. It would make occupation much simpler. Begin standard planetary bombardment, he ordered. Target any remaining infrastructure. We'll establish control and then hunt down the population wherever they've hidden. The first salvo of plasma bolts struck Earth's atmosphere, targeting major cities and military installations. The Admiral watched with satisfaction as energy readings spiked across the planet's surface. Then, something unprecedented happened. Instead of the expected destruction, the planet's surface began generating massive electromagnetic pulses. Every plasma bolt was either absorbed or reflected back toward the fleet. The energy from the bombardment was somehow being converted and redirected. Sir, Captain Draval called out in alarm. Our weapons fire is being turned against us. The reflected energy struck the Zephyrian fleet with devastating effect. Ships that had been designed to dish out punishment had never been engineered to receive their own firepower redirected at them. Shields failed, systems overloaded, and the perfectly organized battle formation began to disintegrate. How is this possible? Kethvar demanded. His answer came from an unexpected source. A human transmission broadcast on Zephyrian military frequencies. Admiral Kethvar, came a voice speaking perfect Zephyrian. This is President Morrison of Earth. I believe it's time we had a conversation. The Admiral's bridge fell silent. Broadcasting on military frequencies was impossible for non-Zephyrians. The encryption was quantum level, constantly shifting, unbreakable by primitive species. How are you accessing our communications? Morrison's voice remained calm and professional. Admiral, over the past 3 months, we've learned a great deal about your technology. Did you know that your quantum encryption has a fascinating vulnerability? When subjected to specific electromagnetic interference patterns, It actually amplifies the very signals it's supposed to protect. Around the fleet, communication systems began malfunctioning. Ship-to-ship coordination became impossible as human-generated interference turned the Zephyrian communication network against itself. Admiral, Morrison continued, I'm going to make you an offer. Order your fleet to stand down, and we can discuss terms. Continue your attack, and discover exactly how creative humans can be when we're fighting for our survival. Kethvar's response was predictable. You face 20 dreadnoughts, human. Your planet cannot withstand our full assault. Admiral, Morrison replied, you're making the same mistake your predecessor made. You're assuming we're still on the planet. The scanners on every Zephyrian ship suddenly lit up with new contacts. Ships were decloaking throughout the solar system, not just around Earth, but behind asteroids, near the gas giants, even some that had been hiding in the shadow of the fleet itself. Impossible, Kethvar breathed. These are our own ship designs. Modified significantly, Morrison admitted. Turns out your technology is quite adaptable when redesigned by people who understand the principles behind it rather than just the operation manual. The human fleet was smaller than the Zephyrian force, perhaps 40 vessels total. But they were positioned perfectly, emerging from concealment at optimal firing positions. More importantly, they had been specifically designed to counter Zephyrian tactics and technology. Admiral, Dr. Chen's voice joined the transmission. We've spent months studying every engagement your empire has fought over the past century. Your tactics haven't changed in decades. You always deploy the same formations, use the same strategies, make the same assumptions. General Rodriguez added his voice to the communication. What you're facing isn't just the human military, Admiral. It's every tactical mistake your empire has made for the past 100 years, analyzed, and turned against you by people who've spent their entire history fighting wars. The battle that followed was unlike anything in Zephyrian military history. Human ships moved in patterns that violated established space combat doctrine. They used their own ships as weapons, deliberately ramming Zephyrian vessels after evacuating their crews to nearby craft. They coordinated attacks with installations throughout the solar system, turning asteroids into missile platforms and gas giant atmospheres into defensive screens. Most disturbing to the Admiral was the humans' apparent disregard for their own losses. Zephyrian doctrine assumed that species would seek to minimize casualties. Humans seemed willing to sacrifice anything to achieve their objectives. Sir, Captain Draval reported, we've lost 8 dreadnoughts. The humans are using tactics we have no counter for. Kethvar watched as a human ship, already crippled and burning, used its last moments to ram a Zephyrian cruiser, taking both vessels out of the fight. They're fighting like they have nothing to lose. Admiral, Morrison's voice came through the chaos of battle. That's because we don't. You came to our home. You occupied our world. You enslaved our people. We're not fighting a territorial dispute or a political disagreement. We're fighting for the right to exist as a free species. The Admiral realized with growing horror that he was facing something the Zephyrian Empire had never encountered, a species that valued freedom more than life itself. The battle lasted 18 hours. When it ended, the Zephyrian battle fleet was scattered wreckage drifting through Earth's solar system. Of the 20 dreadnoughts that had arrived, 3 remained functional, and they were surrounded by human vessels. Admiral Kethvar sat in his damaged command chair, staring at displays showing the complete destruction of his fleet. His career was over. His reputation was destroyed. But, more than that, he was beginning to understand that the human victory represented something far more significant than a single military defeat. Admiral, Morrison's voice came through the communication system one final time. You have 2 choices. Surrender and join our fight against an empire that enslaves entire species, or attempt to escape and explain to your superiors how 20 dreadnoughts were defeated by a primitive world. Kethvar looked around his bridge at the faces of his crew. They were looking to him for leadership, but he realized he had no good options left. What guarantee do I have that you won't simply execute us as prisoners of war? Morrison's answer surprised him. Admiral, we're not interested in executing anyone. We're interested in liberation. Your empire has oppressed dozens of worlds. We're offering you a chance to help free them. For the first time in his military career, Admiral Kethvar found himself considering surrender not as defeat, But as an opportunity to fight on the right side of a war, he was beginning to understand he had been on the wrong side of all along. The Zephyrian Empire had sent their best fleet to teach humanity a lesson about the consequences of resistance. Instead, they had learned something that would shake the foundations of their galactic order. When pushed far enough, some species don't just fight back. They fight to win. Hashtag the Galactic Liberation Admiral Kethvar's surrender changed everything. For the first time in Zephyrian military history, an Imperial Admiral had voluntarily joined forces with a conquered species. But what shocked the Empire even more was what happened next. The human broadcast began 3 days after the battle. Using the captured Zephyrian communication network, Earth sent messages to every world in the Empire. The transmissions were simple, direct, and devastating to Imperial control. "This is President Morrison of Earth," the message began, transmitted in dozens of languages across multiple star systems. 6 months ago, the Zephyrian Empire invaded our world, expecting easy conquest. Today, their fleet lies in ruins around our planet. The hologram showed footage of the space battle, carefully edited to demonstrate that the mighty Zephyrian dreadnoughts could be defeated. More importantly, it showed Admiral Kethvar standing beside human leaders, no longer as conqueror, but as ally. "The Empire wants you to believe that resistance is futile," Morrison continued. "They want you to think their technology makes them invincible. We're here to prove that's a lie. Freedom is always possible if you're willing to fight for it." On 17 different worlds, resistance movements that had been dormant for years suddenly erupted into action. The simple knowledge that the Zephyrian military could be defeated transformed despair into hope across the galaxy. Senator Prime Vexloth convened an emergency session of the Imperial Senate. The ornate chamber on the capital world of Zephyr Prime had never seen such chaos. Senators demanded explanations, military leaders pointed fingers, and reports flooded in of uprisings across the Empire. How? Vexloth demanded of Fleet Admiral Tharx. Did 20 dreadnoughts get defeated by a species that hadn't even achieved interstellar travel 6 months ago? Tharx, the Empire's highest-ranking military officer, had been studying the battle reports with increasing disbelief. "Senator Prime, the humans appear to have capabilities that violate everything we understand about technological development. Explain." "They reverse-engineered our fastest ships and improved them within months. They cracked our quantum encryption and turned our communication system against us. They developed weapons specifically designed to counter our defenses." Tharx paused. "Senator Prime, they fought like they understood our technology better than we do. What the Fleet Admiral couldn't understand was something uniquely human, the ability to innovate under pressure. The Zephyrian Empire had spent centuries using the same technology and tactics because they worked. Humans had spent months learning Zephyrian technology specifically to find ways to defeat it. Recommendation? Vexloth asked curtly. Full mobilization. Deploy the entire Imperial fleet to Earth. Overwhelm them with numbers they cannot possibly counter. It was exactly the wrong decision, and exactly what humanity had been counting on. On Earth, the mood was both celebratory and urgent. The defeat of the Zephyrian battle fleet had proven that the Empire could be beaten, but intelligence reports suggested a much larger force was being assembled. Dr. Chun addressed the emergency council from the Lunar Command Center that had become humanity's de facto capital. Our sources inside the Empire report that they're mobilizing everything. Over 200 dreadnoughts, plus support vessels. The largest fleet in their history. Admiral Kethvar, still adjusting to his new role as military advisor to humanity, nodded grimly. The Empire has never faced a threat to its existence. This would be their total response. President Morrison studied the tactical displays. How long do we have? 2 months, perhaps 3, Kethvar replied. Assembling a fleet that size takes time, even for the Empire. Morrison turned to General Rodriguez. Can we be ready? Rodriguez smiled, but it wasn't a pleasant expression. Sir, we've been preparing for exactly this scenario. The question isn't whether we can be ready. The question is whether they can. What the Zephyrian Empire didn't know was that humanity's strategy had never been limited to defending Earth. For months, human ships had been spreading throughout the galaxy, carrying something more powerful than weapons. Information. Captain Sarah Mitchell commanded one of dozens of human vessels that had been built in secret using captured Zephyrian technology. Her ship, the Liberation, was indistinguishable from a standard Imperial transport to casual inspection. More importantly, it carried cargo that would change the balance of power in the galaxy. Approaching the Kelton system, her navigation officer reported, no Imperial patrols detected. Kelton 3 had been conquered by the Zephyrians 40 years ago. The native Keltani were excellent engineers who had been forced to maintain Imperial mining equipment under occupation. What they didn't know was that their skills would soon be put to a very different purpose. Mitchell's ship landed at the main spaceport, its false Imperial transponder granting immediate clearance. To observers, it appeared to be a routine supply run. But hidden in the cargo holds were electromagnetic pulse generators, communication equipment, and detailed plans for uprising operations. Most importantly, the ship carried proof that the Empire could be beaten. Similar operations were taking place across the galaxy. Human vessels, disguised as Imperial transports, were delivering weapons and hope to oppressed worlds. But they were also delivering something else: coordination. Dr. Raj Patel had solved a problem that had plagued resistance movements throughout galactic history: secure communication across interstellar distances. Using modified Zephyrian technology, he had created a communication network that was undetectable to Imperial monitoring. Every resistance cell will be able to coordinate with every other cell, he explained during a briefing on Mars. When the Empire moves their fleet to attack Earth, uprisings will begin simultaneously on dozens of worlds. The strategy was elegant in its simplicity. The Zephyrian Empire ruled through centralized control and overwhelming force. If they concentrated their fleet at Earth, they would leave the rest of the galaxy undefended. If they divided their forces, they would be vulnerable everywhere. Admiral Thar X stood before the assembled might of the Zephyrian Imperial fleet. 237 dreadnoughts hung in space around Zephyr Prime, along with over 500 support vessels. It was the largest military force in galactic history. The human infection will be cauterized, he announced to his fleet commanders. Earth will be reduced to molten slag. Every human vessel will be destroyed. Their resistance ends today. The fleet departed for Earth with great ceremony, broadcast across the Empire as a demonstration of Imperial power. But as the massive armada traveled through hyperspace, events were already unfolding that would render their mission meaningless. On 17 worlds, resistance movements emerged from hiding simultaneously. Imperial garrisons that had maintained order for decades suddenly found themselves facing coordinated uprisings armed with weapons specifically designed to counter Zephyrian technology. On Kelton 3, the mining platforms that had extracted resources for the Empire were converted overnight into weapons manufacturing facilities. The Keltani engineers, working with human-supplied designs, began producing electromagnetic pulse weapons and distributing them to resistance cells across the planet. On Vraxis Prime, the Vraxian underground used human communication technology to coordinate with resistance movements on 6 neighboring worlds. For the first time, they could plan operations across multiple star systems without Imperial intelligence detecting their transmissions. On Taylor 7, the Aquatitolarian people used their underwater cities as staging areas for attacks on Imperial installations. Human-designed weapons worked perfectly in aquatic environments, giving the Talarians their first military advantage in decades. Senator Prime Vexloth watched the reports flood in from across the Empire with growing horror. How many worlds are in revolt? His aide consulted the constantly updating displays. 47 confirmed, sir. More reports coming in hourly. Imperial response? Minimal, sir. Admiral Thar X took most of our fleet to Earth. We have insufficient forces to respond to multiple uprisings simultaneously. For the first time in centuries, the Zephyrian Empire was losing control of its territory. But the worst news was yet to come. Sir, the communications officer approached nervously. We're receiving a transmission from the human leader. It's being broadcast on all Imperial frequencies across the galaxy. Morrison's image appeared on every Zephyrian communication device throughout the Empire. His message was simple and direct. Citizens of the galaxy, today your liberation begins. What followed was a coordinated information campaign that destroyed the Empire's greatest weapon: the belief that resistance was futile. Using captured Imperial communication networks, humanity broadcast footage of successful uprisings, tactical guide for resistance operations, and proof that Imperial forces could be defeated. Most importantly, they shared the one thing that oppressed populations throughout the galaxy had never had: hope. Admiral Tharx received the first reports of the galactic uprising while his fleet was still in hyperspace. Impossible, he muttered as he reviewed the data. 47 worlds simultaneously? Captain Vorthike, his aide, looked equally stunned. Sir, it appears the humans have been coordinating resistance movements across the galaxy for months. This uprising was planned. The Admiral realized with growing dread that the Empire had made a fatal strategic error. By concentrating their forces against Earth, they had left their entire territory vulnerable. The humans hadn't just been preparing to defend their world. They had been preparing to liberate the galaxy. Sir, the communications officer interrupted. We're receiving a message from Earth. Morrison's voice filled the bridge of the Imperial flagship. Admiral Tharx, by the time you receive this message, 49 worlds will have declared their independence from your empire. Your choice is simple. Continue to Earth and lose your entire territory, or return to face revolutions that are already beyond your ability to suppress. The Admiral stared at the tactical displays showing his massive fleet. 237 dreadnoughts, the pride of the Imperial military, racing toward a confrontation that no longer mattered. Even if he destroyed Earth completely, the Empire would collapse behind him. Admiral, came another voice. Admiral Kethvar, speaking from Earth. I served the Empire for 30 years. I believed we brought order to the galaxy. But order built on oppression isn't order at all. It's just delayed rebellion. Tharx found himself facing the impossible, a war he couldn't win no matter what he did. If he attacked Earth, the Empire would fall to revolution. If he returned to suppress the uprisings, Earth would lead the rebellion. If he divided his forces, he would be defeated everywhere. For the first time in its history, the Zephyrian Empire faced an enemy that had turned their own strength against them. The concentration of force that had made them invincible had become the weakness that would destroy them. As Admiral Tharx stared at the reports of galactic revolution, he began to understand what humanity had accomplished. They hadn't just defeated the Empire's fleet. They had defeated the Empire's strategy, their psychology, and their entire philosophy of conquest. The humans had done something unprecedented in galactic history. They had turned a defensive war into a liberation campaign. And across 49 worlds, oppressed species were discovering what Earth had learned. When pushed far enough, some fights are worth everything. The Zephyrian Empire had ruled for centuries through the simple principle that resistance was futile. Now they were learning that when an entire galaxy decides freedom is worth fighting for, empires become very fragile things indeed. Hashtag the new Galactic Order. Admiral Tharx faced the most difficult decision in Zephyrian military history. His massive fleet hung in space just outside the Sol system, 237 dreadnoughts ready to reduce Earth to ash. Behind him, the Empire was collapsing as world after world declared independence. The tactical situation was impossible. Attack Earth and lose the Empire. Return to suppress revolts and face Earth's growing fleet. Divide his forces and be defeated everywhere. Sir, Captain Vorthike approached hesitantly. Incoming transmission from Zephyr Prime. Senator Prime Vex Lotha's hologram materialized on the bridge, his ceremonial robes disheveled, and his expression grim. Admiral, status report. Senator Prime, we are in position to begin bombardment of Earth. However, Tharx paused, choosing his words carefully. The strategic situation has become complicated. 63 worlds are now in open revolt. Vexloth snapped. Our communications are compromised, our supply lines are cut, and every day brings new reports of Imperial installations being overrun. How is this possible? Tharx had been asking himself the same question. The humans appear to have been planning this for months, sir. They didn't just resist our occupation. They used it to study our weaknesses and coordinate resistance movements across the galaxy. The senator's expression darkened. Are you suggesting that our conquest of Earth was planned by them? The Admiral was beginning to suspect exactly that. Every aspect of a human response seemed designed to achieve maximum strategic advantage. Their initial surrender had lulled the Empire into complacency while they prepared their counterstrike. Their resistance had been calculated to force exactly the response they wanted. Sir, I believe the humans understood from the beginning that defeating one occupation force wouldn't be enough. They needed to defeat the entire empire. And they've accomplished that by turning our own tactics against us. President Morrison's voice interrupted the conversation, broadcast directly to the Imperial flagship. Senator Prime Vexloth, I believe it's time we spoke directly. The fact that humans could penetrate the most secure Imperial communication channels no longer surprised anyone. But the casual tone still sent chills through the bridge crew. President Morrison, Vexloth replied coldly, "You will address me properly or not at all." Senator, Morrison's voice remained conversational. With respect, your title derives its authority from an empire that currently controls about 30% of the territory it held yesterday. Perhaps we should dispense with formalities and discuss reality. The senator's scales darkened with anger. Reality is a fleet of 200 dreadnoughts aimed at your world. Reality, Morrison replied, is that you can destroy Earth and lose everything else, or work with us to build something better than an empire based on oppression. What followed was the strangest negotiation in galactic history. Representatives of a species that hadn't known faster-than-light travel existed 6 months earlier were dictating terms to an empire that had ruled for centuries. Dr. Chen's voice joined the transmission. Senator Prime, we've analyzed Imperial records from liberated worlds. In the past 50 years alone, your empire has enslaved 12 billion sentient beings, strip-mined 43 worlds to ecological collapse, and eliminated 17 distinct cultures. Admiral Kethvar added his voice. I spent 30 years serving the Empire, believing we brought order to chaos. But order imposed through fear and violence isn't order, it's delayed rebellion. Tharex found himself listening to his former colleague with a mixture of anger and growing understanding. Kethvar had always been an exceptional officer, respected throughout the fleet. His defection wasn't treason. It was recognition of a fundamental truth about what the Empire had become. What do you propose? Vexloth asked finally. Morrison's answer was simple. The Empire ends today. What replaces it is up to all of us. The transmission ended, leaving the Imperial leadership to contemplate an impossible situation. Around them, the Empire continued to collapse as more worlds declared independence, and Imperial forces found themselves outnumbered and outmaneuvered. On Earth, the mood was cautious optimism mixed with urgent preparation. Intelligence reports suggested the Imperial fleet remained a threat, but the galactic uprising had exceeded even the most optimistic projections. General Rodriguez addressed the assembled military leaders in the Lunar Command Center. 68 worlds now flying independent flags. Imperial communication networks are completely compromised. Their supply chains are broken. But they still have the largest fleet in galactic history pointed at us, President Morrison noted. Recommendations? Dr. Warren spoke up. Sir, we've been monitoring their communications. There's significant disagreement within their leadership. Admiral Tharex appears to be considering options beyond simple bombardment. Morrison nodded. The carrot and stick approach. We've shown them the stick. Their empire is collapsing. Time to offer the carrot. What humanity offered was something unprecedented in galactic history, a choice between destruction and transformation. The message sent to the Imperial fleet was brief. Admiral Tharex, we're transmitting coordinates for a meeting. Come alone, unarmed, and discover what the galaxy could look like without empires. 6 hours later, a single Zephyrian shuttle approached Earth. Admiral Tharex, the most powerful military leader in Imperial history, traveled to meet with representatives of a species his empire had tried to enslave. The meeting took place aboard a human space station in orbit around Earth. As Tharex stepped through the airlock, he was surprised by what he found. The station wasn't just human. Keltani engineers worked alongside human technicians. Vraxian communication specialists coordinated with Earth programmers. Talarian tactical experts shared intelligence with human strategists. Welcome to the future, Morrison said, greeting the Admiral personally. What you're seeing is just the beginning. Tharex looked around at the diverse species working together. How is this possible? These worlds were conquered decades apart. Dr. Chen stepped forward. Admiral, while your empire was focused on control and submission, we were building networks. communication, cooperation, shared technology. The bonds between oppressed peoples are stronger than the chains of any empire. Admiral HFY joined them, wearing a human uniform but retaining his imperial rank insignia. Tharx, I know what you're thinking. This violates everything we were taught about maintaining order. But look around. This is what order actually looks like when it's built on cooperation instead of fear. The tour that followed shattered every assumption Tharx held about interspecies relations. He saw Keltani engineers teaching human scientists advanced metallurgy. He watched Vraxian philosophers debating ethics with Earth academics. He observed Talarian warriors training alongside human marines, sharing tactical knowledge that made both forces more effective. Your empire maintained order by keeping species separate and dependent, Morrison explained as they observed a joint research facility. We're creating stability by making species interdependent and stronger together. And if one species decides to dominate the others? Tharx asked. General Rodriguez answered, Admiral, we've learned something important about human nature over the past year. When people are fighting for their freedom, they're incredibly dangerous. When they're fighting to preserve their freedom, they're unstoppable. Nobody here wants to be oppressed again. The Admiral was beginning to understand the scope of what humanity had accomplished. They hadn't just defeated the Empire militarily. They had created an alternative that was actually superior. What happens to the Empire? He asked finally. Morrison's answer was unexpected. That depends on you, Admiral. The old Empire is finished. The question is whether you want to help build something better or watch everything you've known collapse into chaos. The choice facing Tharx was the same one that had been offered to his colleague HFY. Continue serving a failing system or help create a successful alternative. What role would the Zephyrian military play in this alliance? The same role every military should play, General Rodriguez replied. Protecting people instead of oppressing them. Dr. Chen added, Admiral, your empire has some of the best military technology in the galaxy. Used defensively instead of aggressively, it could help protect dozens of worlds from external threats. External threats? Morrison nodded grimly. Admiral, while you've been building an empire, we've been monitoring deep space communications. Your empire isn't the only galactic power. There are others, and some of them make the Zephyrians look peaceful by comparison. The revelation that the galaxy contained threats beyond the Empire changed Tharx's entire perspective. The human strategy, suddenly, made sense from a broader view. They weren't just ending the Zephyrian Empire. They were preparing for whatever came next. Show me, the Admiral requested. The intelligence briefing that followed was sobering. Deep space monitoring stations had detected massive fleets moving in distant sectors. Communication intercepts suggested civilizations that made the Zephyrian Empire look restrained. Worst of all, these powers appear to be aware of the Empire's collapse, and were considering expansion into former Imperial territory. The choice isn't between empire and chaos, Morrison concluded. It's between oppression and cooperation, between ruling through fear and leading through strength. Admiral Tharx returned to his fleet with a decision that would reshape galactic history. Addressing his assembled commanders, he announced, The Empire as we knew it is finished. We can either cling to a failing system or help build a successful one. Not every Imperial commander agreed. 17 dreadnoughts broke formation, their captains choosing to attempt a final assault on Earth rather than accept the end of Imperial dominance. The battle was brief and decisive. Human ships, now supported by vessels from dozens of liberated worlds, demonstrated the difference between fighting to conquer and fighting to protect. The rogue Imperial forces were overwhelmed not just by superior tactics, but by superior motivation. Senator Prime Vexloth, watching from Zephyr Prime as his empire dissolved around him, finally accepted reality. His final transmission to the galaxy was simple. By Imperial decree, all territorial claims are hereby relinquished. All worlds are free to determine their own governance. With those words, the Zephyrian Empire officially ended. What replaced it was something unprecedented in galactic history, the Free Worlds Alliance. Built on principles of cooperation rather than domination, defended by forces that fought to protect rather than conquer, and governed by representatives chosen by their people rather than appointed by distant rulers. Admiral Tharx found himself serving as supreme military commander of the Alliance, coordinating defense forces from dozens of worlds. Admiral Kethvar became Earth's representative to the Alliance Council. Most surprisingly, Senator Prime Vexloth requested asylum on Earth, and spent his remaining years helping to document Imperial crimes for the Galactic Truth and Reconciliation Commission. President Morrison, addressing the first session of the Alliance Council, spoke words that would be remembered throughout galactic history. Today we prove that freedom is not just the right to exist, but the power to flourish. The galaxy is wide enough for every species to find their own path among the stars. The Zephyrian Empire had come to Earth expecting an easy conquest. Instead, they had encountered something they never anticipated, a species that turned defeat into victory, oppression into liberation, and empire into alliance. Humanity had done more than fight back. They had shown the galaxy what was possible when people refused to accept that oppression was inevitable. The words "resistance is futile" became a relic of the past, replaced by a new understanding. When an entire galaxy decides that freedom is worth fighting for, nothing is futile except trying to stop them. The Empire had taught the galaxy to fear. Humanity taught it to hope. And hope, it turned out, was the most powerful weapon of all.